Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Break the State podcast. Joining me in this episode today, talking about some of the common objections that libertarians and anarchists get from those on the left, is Jamie Kane, host of the Liberty Uninterrupted podcast. You can find him over on Instagram at Liberty Uninterrupted. Be sure to give him a follow over there. So, without further ado, I'm Dunk Limpman, and this is Break the State podcast. All right, this is Break the State Podcast, episode 4. As always, I'm your host, Dunk Limpman, and joining us today is Jamie Kane. Jamie is the founder of Liberty Uninterrupted and the host of the Liberty Uninterrupted podcast. I believe you can find him just about anywhere that podcasts are streaming. You can also find him over on Instagram at Liberty Uninterrupted. What's going on, Jamie? How's it going, man?
What's going on, brother? Nothing much, man. I'm super excited to be on Break the State, man. I'm a huge fan, and I appreciate you reaching out. So,
yeah, excellent. I appreciate you coming on, man. So for anybody that's not familiar, what's kind of like the quick 2-minute, background on who is Jamie Kane, and what do you got going on?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't know what's going on. I'm not well known. I can tell you that. I'm nobody special, but so like you said, I'm the founder of Liberty Uninterrupted. I say a lifelong libertarian, but essentially since I could legally vote, I've identified as a libertarian and just a liberty activist or liberty advocate, however you want to put that. And I, like we were talking before we started recording, is I have never shied away from having the hard conversations in any facet of my life. And especially when it comes to politics, because I have as a libertarian, I have a deep love for the founding values of our country. And I believe that America in its ideal is an amazing place, and the place that freedom shines the brightest. Unfortunately, we don't have a government that lives up to those ideals or lives up to our founding documents. And so I decided if I'm going to start speaking to as many people as I want to, then I got to start a podcast. I actually had a lot of people reach out to me because I ran another podcast that was business oriented that had a pretty big following, and decided that the knowledge I learned there could be applied to a liberty oriented podcast with an Instagram page where I'm not sure if I create memes, quote unquote. I just create content of just that is focused on liberty. A lot of it quotes, a lot of it just my own personal ideals. And the whole point of my, show and Instagram and what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to unite the liberty movement, because I feel like there's a lot of division within our movement, and understand that even though we disagree in a lot of things, we're still part of a movement that wants to see minimalistic government or no government at all, and just maximize liberty. And I think that's something we can all unite behind, and that's kind of the elevator pitch, I guess. So
awesome, man. Yeah. So today on the podcast, I wanted to discuss this meme of all things that I saw over on Facebook. And this is my private Facebook account. I don't have one for Break the State. That might be something that I do in the future. But anyhow, an acquaintance of mine posted this, and I almost commented on it, but I thought rather than getting into a debate with him in the comments, which usually doesn't really lead anywhere productive on Facebook, I decided that this was actually a good topic, or like a handful of topics for us to kind of delve into in an episode. And so this actually has to do with Jo Jorgensen, the libertarian candidate for president. And I know that you campaigned for Jo.
Yeah, I'm a volunteer campaign. I'm actually I won't disclose where I live, but I am the city manager for my town for her campaign. So I head up the campaign, basically logistics in my area. So for her, yeah.
Yeah, I know that Spike Cohen, the VP candidate for the Libertarian Party, he's actually going to be in my state here soon, and my girlfriend wants to kind of possibly go check that out. But
yeah, he's awesome, man. I love Spike. I think Spike captures the more left-leaning libertarians, where Joe Jorgensen captures the more classical libertarians. So I think it's a good mixture.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And for me, personally, I guess what you would consider like an anarchist. So I don't really believe in a state to begin with. So I don't really advocate on my page for, Joe Jorgensen or for a government at all, or on this podcast really. But of course, looking at the candidates, if you do find yourself wanting to vote, I would encourage you to vote for, the person that's going to bring about the least amount of violence and destruction, which is obviously going to be the Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
At least in theory. I mean, we don't know for sure until they get in there at some point. But
right.
For me personally, I don't believe that we can really vote our way out of the situation that we're in now. I think it's really going to take a mass awakening of people to just kind of come to the understanding of what liberty means for their life, and just really withdraw consent, in a sense, from the system in order for the system to kind of collapse in on itself. And, if we build up something else different from that, at least it's in the hopes that it's a liberty-based system.
Yeah.
So
I've heard that opinion before, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. I'm under the opinion that obviously the presidency, because like I said, as a libertarian, I am a constitutionalist. I believe that the Constitution, while not a perfect document, is the best of all founding documents. And I think if you read it, the men that created it were, and obviously we can disagree. That's totally fine, right? Like that's what this is all about. But I just believe the men that created that document, like, were all about like that individual liberty. While they may have not lived up to themselves, their ideals, I believe, were correct, right? But I agree that voting in itself isn't. I mean, I feel like I don't feel like I'm not one of those that says like you have to vote, and if you don't vote, you don't get an opinion, because I think not voting is just as much action as voting. I want to vote my principles, and that for me, Joe Jorgensen aligns with almost everything I believe, right? So outside of a couple of different issues. So but I agree with voting at this point. I don't know how much it's going to change. My opinion is that we need to have what's called a constitutional convention, where we would essentially be reversing a lot of amendments. And so I'm a big advocate for that. And there's actually a convention of states .org, I believe, and I've donated to them to kind of, bring about that movement. So I agree with you there. I think it's just a different way of going about it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the worries for me, even with just the existence of a limited government, is the thought that, the state is always going to try to expand its reach and its power and what have you. So my worry is that even with the small government, it's going to grow into what we have again now. I mean, we started with the Constitution, but we can get into that at another time. I think.
Yeah. I just wanted to cover that while you. I know that's not what you want to talk about. But.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely, man. But so this meme is probably a meme that most of us have seen before, at least the format. It's got Homer Simpson standing in front of Marge. He's got like his chest puffed out. He's in that kind of Superman pose. He's looking all chiseled, and it says, yeah, it is. And on the bottom portion, it's got all of his all of his fat tied around his back, and so it's kind of showing this is what somebody might be hiding. These are, hiding their true intentions, or hiding something that they don't really want you to find out. And so in this, the good looking Homer Simpson up at the top says Joe Jorgensen. And then with all of his fat pulled back on the bottom portion, it says no paid maternity leave, no minimum wage, no environmental regulations, no Medicare for all, privatized education in prison, cut taxes for corporations, more welfare restrictions, and anti-union. So basically, this is like a meme, probably from somebody on the left, that's saying, this is why you shouldn't vote for Joe Jorgensen, or, these are the terrible things that would come with a libertarian presidency, or, just in a libertarian society in general. These are a lot of the arguments that I actually get a lot. Yeah. Not even discussing Joe Jorgensen, but just discussing a stateless society. Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to see, if we can kind of delve into some of these topics and kind of, get some conversation going, some disputes to, these objections that people have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's when you sent me that meme over Instagram, my first reaction was that's the reason I'm voting for, And I've seen a similar meme like this that said it was like an iceberg, right? Where the tip of the iceberg is sticking out of the water and the rest of the iceberg, obviously the bulk of it was underwater. And it said like Joe Jorgensen at the top, and then it said, legalize, ending the war on drugs, like, police reform, and so all the things that liberals like, but then underneath was basically all the economic stuff and like free market stuff. Right. And it's saying like she was hiding this agenda, and I post on that on that was on Facebook and of a friend of mine that's actually voting for Biden. I said that's all the reasons I'm voting for her, man. Like I think all those things are fantastic things. So I'd love to dive into this, and there's plenty of rebuttals for that meme. So there's no shortage of opinions there.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess let's start with number one, which is no paid maternity leave. And, the first thing I want to say on that is that right now, as far as I'm aware, there is no federal regulation for businesses to provide paid maternity leave. However, in, the society that we're in now, a lot of businesses do choose to pay maternity leave to people. So I'm not fears that, it's going to just dissolve, that businesses are no longer going to offer that because they already do and they're not being forced to.
Right.
What are your thoughts on paid maternity leave? I know you said before the show you didn't have a whole lot of thoughts on that particular topic, but what's your initial thought on that?
Yeah, I think if this came into a conversation of mine if somebody was trying to see if they were trying to vote for Joe Jorgensen. I think my reaction would be this: is like what's going to be with you now. I don't know a ton on that subject. I haven't done a deep dive into paid maternity leave or not. I thought there was a law or something like that saying that there had to be. I don't know if there is either. But sorry, my dog is in the room with me. I got to push him back. But my opinion is this: the government has no place in telling a business how to operate. Zero.
Absolutely.
In a free market capitalist society, which we are not in right now, which the left likes to claim that we're in a free market society, and we're definitely not. We're living in corporatism or crony capitalism, right? But the government has no place in telling a business how to operate. And so my opinion is, and a lot of libertarians and probably yours as well, that businesses will do what they have to do because they are selfish, right? So if they want the best employees, they're going to have to require a maternity leave. If they don't have a maternity leave, then they're going to lose a good section of employees that require that, like good, hardworking women that want to start a family. They're not going to go work there because if they don't have maternity leave, then I'm not going to sacrifice that for you. And so they're going to have to compete with the market, just like I don't know any company right now that doesn't have paid maternity leave. And if we got rid of that law, we don't have any law already, then that just goes to show you that the free market is in some way has already solved that problem. And so that would kind of be my opinion there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually really well put. My one input that I want to say is just that in defense of, a company that may not want to offer paid maternity leave is that, if it might be a job where you are on your feet, moving heavy objects or out in the heat or what have you. And, some people kind of think, it seems to me that they think that no matter what the job is, if they were to get pregnant and leave, that they should continue getting paid. And I'm like, if I'm if I'm paying you to mow my lawn and you're 8 months pregnant.
I don't want you mowing anybody.
If you're 8 months pregnant and you can't mow the lawn anymore, I'm still gonna have to pay somebody else to do that. So why should I continue to pay you, to do a job that you can't perform physically? And we don't know how long it's going to be until you're back. And so, when I hired you for the position, it was under the assumption that you were going to be able to do the job. And if you can't do the job, that's not necessary, especially considering that, leftists are typically more, pro-choice, they're pro-abortion. And so in their mind, they are making the decision to keep the baby, and then
I find that's an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? How the left likes to talk about, because I'm personally that's one of the few positions I hold that the Libertarian Party does not, is that I am pro-life. I think life is an inherent right. And people can disagree with me. That's fine. But I think it's an interesting dichotomy there, because you're in favor of paid maternity leave, but then you're also in favor of in my opinion, killing an unborn child, right? And so it's just kind of interesting how I'm sure somebody could poke a hole in that argument, but that conflict there seems almost, too easy to dismiss.
Right. Yeah.
I agree with you, but I agree with you. I didn't think about the physical labor jobs, and I think one point ahead of that is I don't think any business should discriminate against anybody. I don't. I just don't think the government should force them to do that, right? I just think morally, if I own a business, I'm going to treat everybody the same. That's what I would do, but the government shouldn't force me to do that, right? And so, but what I was going to say is with those physical labor jobs, those are primarily dominated by men, obviously. And so if a company wanted to not discriminate against women, but say like, we really want to hire men because this is very taxing, like working at a steel mill, they could say, yeah, we're not going to offer paid maternity leave, which would then probably cut out a lot of, women that they wouldn't be willing to hire unless a woman doesn't plan on, having children. She wants to work in the physical field, the blue collar field, then she'd be more than welcome to work there. Right. But I think that cuts out the kind of people that maybe they're not looking to hire. And so that could be a way to do that without discriminating. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, see, I think you had more to say on it than you thought you did.
yeah, you're surprising me, man. You're making me, put my back up against a wall here.
Oh man, no worries. So let's jump to number 2, which is no minimum wage. I know this is a big one for libertarians. I mean, even conservatives, that are against the minimum wage, but specifically for yourself and I, libertarian, anarchist, whatever you want to call it. When talking about the minimum wage, that's a hard one, especially, and I said for conservatives, but there's also a lot of conservatives that do support the minimum wage. So this is not one only that we have to argue with the left on, but sometimes the right as well. What are your thoughts on minimum wage?
I'm always going to default to the free market. Do I think that minimum wage is a good thing? Yeah, I don't believe there should be a living wage. I hate that term on the left because minimum wage jobs are meant to help you get through school or get into the professional world, or understand how your work ethic works, or even get through high school. Like minimum wage jobs are not meant to support a family. So I hate the idea of there has to be a living wage. That's ridiculous. In my opinion, in a free market society where the government is not involved whatsoever in what businesses do, there wouldn't be a minimum wage. And once again, the free market solves, I don't know if all problems, because we haven't lived in that society for a really long time. At least as long as we've been alive. But I think that if you want to, once again, hire the best employees, then you're going to offer the best pay, right? And so I think if it comes down to the free market, if we didn't have the government involvement, once again, businesses will say, I'm not going to say, hey, I'm going to pay you $2 an hour, because nobody would want to work there. They're going to have to compete with businesses just like on products or services with trying to hire the best people. And if they don't, I'm telling you right now, if I walk into a place and I've turned down jobs before, and they say, hey, we're going to offer you this, and I think it's below what the value that I bring to the table, then I'm going to go look for a job elsewhere. That happens now all the time, and I don't even think about minimum wage. So that's my opinion on there. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but I think that's probably the simplest answer I could give you right now.
Yeah. There's nothing really that you said there that I can necessarily disagree with. For me, another point to bring to the table with that is, especially again for people on the left, this also kind of falls into the whole union bit, is that, a certain group of people have decided that no, it's one thing to say that I will not work for less than $10 an hour, but it's another thing to say that guy over there will also not work for less than $10 an hour. If that guy over there wants to work for $7.50, that's his prerogative, and you don't have, authority over this other human being to decide what their labor is worth. That's between them and the person that they're contracting with.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think that's and the funny thing is, like, unions, when people first started unionizing, they weren't a bad thing because people were voluntarily getting involved, and it was there originally to protect the rights of the workers. Now unions nowadays are a freaking joke. And they're lobbyist groups now. They don't even protect the people they're supposed to protect, their employees. But I think if we lived in a free market society where, once again, the government is not involved and people did want to unionize to ensure that, hey, like, we want to make sure our trade is getting a fair shake, and still the government's not involved. But hey, like as a unified group that they want and then volunteer to be in, we do that. Then that's our prerogative to band together as a tribe of sorts and say none of us are going to work for less than that. I think that's a positive thing. Obviously, today unions once again have become lobbyist groups. They're not really, and they don't even protect their employees. But I think in a free market society, I think unions could work if we're looking at it like that, like they originally were meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess since we're kind of on the topic of unions, just to kind of sum that up, I would also say that, again, like you said, people should be free to organize, and in a free market, they can organize as they wish. But again, at the same time, it just is bearing in mind that somebody still can come in and, they would call it undercutting them. They would call them a scab or what have you, but they're going to come in and say, look, you guys don't want to work for $10 an hour. I'm happy to do it. And I'll go in there and do the job. And it really is just a matter of what the market, how the market works itself out.
Yeah. So being in a union doesn't automatically make you right? It just means you want to band together as a group and say, these are our demands for employment, right? But if Mike is in union A and then there's Dan who's not in any union, he's willing to work for $750, not 10, then that company has the right to hire that guy for $750, and that's Dan's right to take less money if he wants to, right? So I totally agree there. That's the beauty of free market. I mean, that's phenomenal. I think, and also there's a certain point where I know a lot of people are afraid that, that if we didn't have any government, quote unquote, regulations, that we would turn into like almost a Mad Max Fury Road of corporations, right? Like, in that we would be run by corporate overlords and not, politicians. But at the end of the day, people don't understand that DC and corporations are already in bed together. They have already been in together, and we are run by corporatism now. Free market capitalism stands for the individual. And I think that's where people that don't understand economics, and I'm not an expert, but I have tried to understand as best as I can. We have to understand that we are already living in that system, and you just don't even realize it, right? So free market to me is always going to be the answer to these questions.
100%. Oh yeah. So let's jump into number 3, which is no environmental regulations. I know this is a very big one for especially people on the left. Is that, in a society where we let the market run free, everybody's just going to be polluting everywhere is kind of their idea. We're just going to be dumping chemicals into people's backyards, and the world will be on fire by 2022. You know what I mean? In their mind.
At this rate, man, we're going to be on fire anyway. So it doesn't matter, dude.
We already are on fire. Yeah, that's a good point.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So, so what are your thoughts, as far as regulations, environmental regulations in a free market? Do you think that the market can regulate itself in that regard?
I do. Yeah, I think the EPA is a joke of an organization, for one. I'll just say that. But two, I actually just had this conversation. I saw a friend of mine who's slightly left-leaning post a meme on his Instagram that said, on my personal Instagram, it said, Black Lives Matter shouldn't be politicized, and the environment shouldn't be politicized, this, that, and the other. And I said, I agree with that statement. I don't think any of those things should be inherently political. But the problem is the duopoly, the system we're in, makes those things political, right? And so personally, on a personal level, I would consider myself an environmentalist, not like a hippie, tree hugging, like chain myself to a tree and like I eat meat. I'm not a freaking vegan, but I really enjoy the outdoors. Like I love to hike, I love to kayak, I cycle, like I love being outside. I love the planet that we have. Like I love my favorite vacations are going to the best hiking places in the world. That's what I want to do. I don't want to go
100.
You know what I'm saying? So I'm about protecting the environment. I just don't think the government does a good job of it. I don't think it does at all. If we look at the free market once again, and we're even living in corporatism, as I've already said, but if we look at the market as is, companies now, like I just went to Blaze Pizza the other day, big fan of Blaze Pizza, and they're not doing the straw things. They're doing like the sippy cup top lids or whatever, which I think is ridiculous. But the point being is no one forced them to do that. No one forced them to stop giving people straws. They inherently did it. More and more businesses, for instance, like the Staples Center where the Lakers play, is powered almost exclusively by solar power. No one made them do that. Now, the state has incentives for them to do that, California, obviously. But at the end of the day, they decided to do that on their own will and accord. And at the same time, I think a lot of people like me, I appreciate when a cup says, made out of recycled material. I think it's a good thing to recycle. I just don't think the government should force a company to do that. But am I, as a consumer, going to go somewhere that says, hey, like, we care about the environment, like, we're recycling stuff, we want to give you the best products, blah, 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 and protect the planet we love? I will go there instead of the place that, like, says, yeah, we're just going to throw trash in the street, right? Like, that's how that works. And I think a lot of people care about the environment. And I think we see that already without government regulations. And the problem is the government always makes things worse. They always make things hard for companies and for individuals. And we look at the rate right now, I don't think the environment's any better having the government in it right now. I mean, look at California. They have 1 million environmental regulations, and that place is a freaking dump, dude. I mean, it is. It's just no offense to anybody who live in California, but there's trash everywhere. There's needles in the street. There are people shit in the middle of the street. I mean, I just don't see how their policies have helped them at all there.
Yeah, California's California. we can just do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah, they're fleeing, man. They're fleeing in droves from California. I'm seeing that where I live, and you probably do too. So
yeah, I'm from Texas, and they yep. There's a lot of them here.
I always see Don't California Texas on Instagram because I have a lot of friends who live in Texas. So it's I don't blame them for posting that, but I'm not sure. I don't know what's your opinion on that. If you agree with that, or you think there should be. You probably don't, considering you consider yourself an ANCAP. But I'm interested in what you think.
Yeah, well, one thing that I wanted to point out when it comes to the environment is that the United States federal government is one of the world's worst polluters, especially when you consider the United States military and the depleted uranium and all of the tons upon tons of fossil fuels that are eaten up by the military industrial complex, and these are things that wouldn't inherently exist in a free market, a genuine free market, where we don't have, or at least in a stateless society or in just a libertarian society, we wouldn't be going overseas and getting involved in all of these foreign wars and things. So that's tons and tons of environmentalism, brought back, or brought back into our hands, away from the state, is just kind of defunding the military in that regard. And again, going back to the state is the subsidizing of the corn industry, and with the farming in general, but specifically with the corn, corn is used as majority for livestock feed. And I know I don't know the science behind this as much, so I'm not really going to try to dispute that. But I do know I've heard a lot of people on the left, especially vegans and what have you, that say how bad meat consumption is for the environment. And so again, without such, without the state being involved in these subsidies for these for the farming industry, that would substantially reduce the amount of meat that people consume, which assuming that the science is there, then that would be another thing for the environment that would be, a cost, benefit, I guess you would call it. I agree with a stateless society. I had tri-tip steak for dinner tonight at a friend's house, right? Like I love meat. I think, I don't know the science behind the fact that, like, creating meat is harmful to the environment. I've heard that plenty of times. I'm also a big fan of, like, I personally like to eat organically just because I don't like all the crap they put in our food and stuff nowadays. I try to eat organically as possible. I'm not perfect at it, right? But I'd rather go get a cow from a farm or go, eat something that a buddy of mine, kills when he goes and hunts, So I think that once again, the government doesn't have to force anybody to do anything. I think at the end of the day, human beings, we've done okay. I wouldn't say we've done perfectly, obviously, and there's a lot of idiots out there, but it's not like government has made our society any better, right? It's not like it's not like the invention of government, especially what we have now, has drastically changed how we're not living in a utopia because we have a massive government now. That was always the idea, right? People just think, we haven't gone far enough. No, we've gone too far, and that's the issue. And I think that's evidently clear in the environmental. I actually served in the U.S. Army right after I graduated high school, and if I had to take it back, I would have. But I
I'm not ashamed of my service, but joining the military, I can definitely test what you just said about the waste and the pollution, and to the fact that we're fighting wars not for freedom's sake, and we're involved in too many places at one time for no good reason, and we're making ourselves less safe by being all over the place. So I wanted to comment on that because I have firsthand experience there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was something I did fail to mention, that you did serve in the military. So So one last thing that I just want to say is that pollution, really what it comes down to is a property rights issue. If your neighbor is polluting and that's causing your land, to become polluted, then that's a property rights issue. That's something that you would take to a court system, whether that's a private court system or a government run court system or whatever the case may be. That's an infringement on your rights as a property owner to have this other, property owner down the road that's, polluting your air, polluting your water supply, and all of these different things. So that's just one more, point I wanted to add to that.
I didn't even think about that. That's super. Can I ask you a question, actually, if that's okay with you?
Yeah.
So what would you say about, what is the anarchist view? I mean, I've studied a lot of, anarcho-capitalist ideas. Obviously, I consider myself obviously a libertarian, and I definitely, I think I'm somewhere in the middle between a libertarian and a minarchist or a minarchist. I don't know how you pronounce that, but I say minarchist. But so I'm somewhere there. What's the ANCAP view of public land? Because I know that there's some people that say like there should be no public land; it should be all privatized. And I don't actually have an opinion on this. So I just wanted to see what your opinion was.
Yeah, so
if
that's actually,
if not, dude, like, I'm sorry I asked you the question. So
no, you're fine. So that's actually, I won't get too deep into that because for one thing, I am still kind of doing my research on that, and that's actually something that I want to bring up on another podcast. I'm kind of actually looking for somebody to discuss that with currently. But I will say that I believe in a stateless society. I suppose that there could be sort of like a crowd-funded public space, right? And this is something that I think you brought up with that libertarian bitch from Instagram, and that's her Instagram name. We're not calling her a bitch here.
She asked us to call her that, so don't no one get offended out there,
So that was something that you guys had talked about, is like voluntary taxes,
right?
And when you say that, your ideal system is actually where you would have like voluntary taxes, to me, I'm like, he's actually a little more of an anarchist than he gives himself credit for, but I won't push you on that.
Before. Yeah.
but getting to my point is that people are free to put their money together, and if 1,000 people buy several hundred acres of land, and they want to allow anybody to have access to that, maybe there's a fee to get in or what have you, just like a park might be now. When you go to a state park, you usually pay a fee. It would be the same type of thing, I would think. But definitely I'm going to have somebody on, I hope, at some point in the future to discuss, because definitely one of the big topics that I've always kind of considered or wondered about in my mind is like the national parks. If the state were to dissolve, what's going to happen to the national parks? And I think that a lot of people really value that land and being able to go out and, like you said, go hiking and kayaking and all those things. I love all of those things as well. So, how would we preserve those things without having to use the aggression and the violence of the state? So that's definitely something that I'm going to bring up on a future podcast, but I do appreciate you bringing that up.
I'll definitely be giving that one a listen, because I think that's one of the few problems that I haven't seen libertarianism offer me a decent answer to that, and so I look forward to hearing that, man. I think, because like you said, national park, I live close to several national parks actually, and they're beautiful places, and I'd hate to see them get ruined. And so but I also don't think that the government should be, obviously running our lives. So it's a conundrum. So I look forward to hearing that episode. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's hop into, is it number 4? No Medicare for all. I know this is a hot button issue, especially, in our society nowadays in the United States. A lot of people really want Medicare for all. They want this universal socialized medicine. They point to countries like Canada and the UK and talk about how amazing it is over there with their medical system. what do you have to say about socialized medicine, Medicare for all, that good stuff?
I'm going to have to, make sure I don't overdo this, man, because I have a lot of opinions when it comes to this one. I think socialized medicine does not need to be proven that it's a horrible idea, that it does not work, that it costs so much more, and that the quality of healthcare decreases drastically. I actually had a conversation with two of my best friends who happen to be married, and the wife, we were talking about, we started the conversation talking about gun rights, because I'm a 2A absolutist. I think all gun restrictions are unconstitutional and against our natural right to keep and bear arms and protect ourselves, according to the non-aggression principle. But then it got into healthcare, and she said, well, don't you believe that healthcare is a human right? I said, no, I don't believe that. And then we also got into like the cost, and she said how expensive it was. And this is what I told her. And I'll just say this, because this is the shortest way I can probably answer it, is the government makes everything more expensive. When the government got involved, when Obamacare became the thing in this country, premiums increased by, I think, 500 to 700%. It was astronomical. I remember my parents talking about how they couldn't afford healthcare anymore. And that was the first time in my life that I ever thought that would have to be a thing. And so what happens is we see that when the government gets involved, especially when it comes to socialized medicine, well, there's only one option. That means there's no competition. There's no free market answer to that. So quality of healthcare will decrease because there's no competition, right? We see areas of like plastic surgery and cosmetic surgery are increasingly becoming cheaper because government is not involved in those industries, right? There's no subsidies, there's no regulations really in those two industries. And yet the quality of the surgeons has increased, but the pricing has decreased. It's supply and demand. It's the art of competition. It's basic economics. So when you take the competition out of the market, prices are going to rise because why wouldn't they? There's no competition. What does it matter? Because they have to compete with the government in the first place. And so my answer to that is this: get government out of healthcare, remove the stupid state line argument saying that because I live where I live, I can't get a policy in Kentucky or New York, right? Like where I live shouldn't matter. I should be able to call a local insurance company in Indiana and say, hey, I want to get a policy from you because the guys here locally are just gouging me. That would eliminate so much high cost just by allowing interstate competition. So hopefully that wasn't too much, but that's my opinion there.
No, you're fine. I think that that definitely covers, the economic aspect of it. And what I want to add, jumping back to the beginning where you said you were talking about healthcare as a human right, and you said, no, I don't agree with that. Absolutely. I don't agree with that either. There's a lot of things that people believe are a human right, healthcare, education, housing, food. And, that sounds very radical, an idea that you don't have a right to these things. But what people fail to understand is that in order for these rights to be upheld, somebody is going to have to produce something for you. So in order for you to have a right to healthcare, that means that there must be a doctor that's willing to, or even not willing, that is forced to, perform services on you. If you're on a desert island and there's two, you and one other person, and you break your leg and the other person doesn't heal it up for you, you're not being oppressed. Yeah, that's what it ultimately comes down to. Every right. Every right has to come down to you and one other person on a desert island. If X happens and the other person doesn't do something to make your life better in that circumstance, are your rights being infringed upon? And it's almost always the answer is no. As long as they're not harming you, harming your stuff, taking from you your life, liberty, or property, your rights are not being infringed upon. You are not being oppressed by not being granted the labor or the fruit of the labor of another person.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think you said life, liberty, and property. And that comes from John Locke, right? I love how liberals like to use that argument. I've heard it before, like, oh, because in libertarianism and in constitutional conservatism And I probably even being an ANCAP, like there's a lot of respect for John Locke because he was such a individualist and believed in individual freedom and rights. And they like to use that whole property thing against us. But he wasn't saying that like the government should give you property. He was saying that you have a right to your own property and you have a right to protect your property, right? And that's I believe that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and essentially I believe that when all the government should do is ensure our rights, and our rights, personally, in my opinion, are guarded by the non-aggression principle, right? Essentially, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. That's the old adage in the libertarian movement. Matt Kibbe wrote a book about that. And so I think it's the same thing with healthcare. At the end of the day, it's people like that's how they escape that, right? Oh, the government's supposed to protect our rights. So if we say that healthcare is a human right, then they have to protect it. And that's how they try to get away with that. But our rights are secured by the non-aggression principle. And that's pretty much all I think the government is good for. And so when it comes to healthcare, we would be much better served, and more people would have healthcare, and even the oldest generations that are retired and aren't working would have better healthcare in a free market where people are competing for their services and offering the best solutions. Competition goes up and quality goes up. That's how it works in economics.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a great video by a YouTube channel called I think it's Bitbutter, 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 something like that. I'll post it on my Instagram here soon. That talks about when the government got involved in healthcare, prior to that, how much cheaper it was, and kind of the reasons behind that. It's a really great little short animated video that just about anybody can understand. So I'll definitely be posting that soon.
You would think anybody could understand it. And then you show Bernie, bro, and you'll be surprised, man. So.
That's fair point. That's a fair point. So number 5 on this list here, we've got privatized education and prisons. And really, this is kind of 2 separate things. So I guess we'll maybe start with education and then we'll jump to prisons afterwards. But privatized education, I know, again, education is a right, is a big, rallying cry on the left. So, what are your thoughts on privatized education versus public education?
Yeah, well, I'll say this too before we even get into it. The whole prison thing, I'll let you take the lead on that because I haven't thought enough about that. The education thing I have, so happy to help with this one. I think it goes without even really being said. If you look at public schools and you look at private schools, which schools have better average GPAs? It is typically the private schools. What's the reason why? Is that they can be selective about the students that they bring in, for one. And I know that's an argument against the left's thing, so I'll get into that in a second. But 2, the people they hire, they can hire more quality people because it is privatized, because they can be more selective on who they hire. Obviously, to go to a private school, you have to, and I went to public schools, right? I think I went to a private school like 1 year of my entire life. And I tell you what, it was the nicest school that I went to. And so it was too expensive, obviously, compared to public school, which is free. So I couldn't go anymore. But with all that being said, it was nicer. I actually got better grades in that school than I had in my entire life because I wasn't a school guy. And so I think you can see that now, that the quality of education is better in privatized education, for one. 2, with public education, you see that there are so many issues with the curriculum. I am under the deep belief that the Department of Education at the federal level needs to be abolished yesterday. The fact of the matter is the government believes that they know better than we do how to educate our children, how they should learn, what they should do. If we had a privatized system of education that was based at the state and local levels, parents could select the schools that best fit their students, not only their interests, but how they learn, what they're good at learning, what they're not good at learning. There would be schools that are specialized to do that, and that parents could make the decisions within their communities about how they want their kids to learn and where they want them to learn. And that's my biggest issue, is that the government is telling us that we don't know best for our children, which is utter bullshit. Excuse my French.
No, absolutely. I mean, like you said, I went to public school as well. My son goes to public school. We simply can't afford to do a homeschool or a private school thing at the moment. So, this is not to bash on anybody that went to public school. Most people did.
Absolutely not.
But like you said, I really liked what you brought up about, how children learn. And being able to teach them in different ways. There's no one size fits all. And this is something that when I posted something recently, I don't even remember which meme it was, something about public schooling versus homeschooling. And everybody's like, well, when you homeschool your kids, they're going to come out, they're going to be weird. They're going to be socially awkward and all of these things. And I'm like, maybe because they aren't one of the, the worker drones that continuously gets churned out by this state monopoly on education, they're going to be a little bit different. They're going to be smarter. They're going to be more mature. They're going to be better equipped to handle everyday situations. They're not going to need a safe space, when they get out of high school, because they're going to be around different people of different ages, different ideas. Same thing, like you said, for private schools, you can send your children to a private school that's best catered to meet their needs, as opposed to this monopoly is one word that I think we've been missing from the conversation this evening is, the state always has a monopoly on these different things. And you might have actually mentioned that in the healthcare portion, come to think of it. But again, something that the left is often opposed to are monopolies. And when you look at the fact that the state has a monopoly on education, and we know for a fact that, as you pointed out earlier, these huge mega corporations are in bed with the state. These mega corporations are the left's, worst enemy. And here they are in bed with the state, and they are influencing what our children are learning through this monopolized education system. Why would you want your children to go to this state-run, indoctrination camp? And what there's a Free Talk Live is a radio show that I'll probably mention way too often on this show. But one of their hosts, it's an anarcho-capitalist libertarian type of program that's nationally syndicated.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, definitely check it out. They're nationally syndicated. They're on AM radio. They might even be in your town. They're not in mine, but I just catch the the MP3 download later. But
right.
Anyhow, where was I going with this? One of the hosts commonly just refers to public school as the God, what was it now? The daycare, basically the public daycare. That's one thing that people bring up a lot is, not everybody can afford to pay for their kid to go to school. Well, you already are paying for your kid to go to school. Even if you don't own land and you're not getting a property tax handed to you once a year, you're still paying a property tax. You're paying your apartment owner, a small portion that they're going to use later to pay their property taxes. So even though you don't see it, you're still paying for it in one way or another. Nothing's free.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and I want to go back to something that you said, if I can remember what you said in the beginning. Now, that
was a lot. Sorry.
I talked a lot too. What did you say? What did you say in the beginning of that statement? Something about, dang it, I can't even remember.
Shit, I can't.
If it comes back to me, I'll say it. But I agree with all of what you just said. I think it goes without being said that. Oh, you talked about standardized testing, right? Like the government having a monopoly on this is how kids should learn. I mean, you look at standardized testing, you look at like the SOL and stuff that I had to take. I grew up in Virginia. That's where I'm originally from. I no longer live there, but and the SOL was a big thing there, which is hilarious because you say SOL, shit out of luck. That's what it was with that when you were taking that test. Because if you didn't learn like the rest of the kids did, like I didn't, it's one of those things that you're just up a creek without a paddle. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of really, really smart, articulate kids get missed in our system simply because the state deems them not worthy. They deem them that, they're not up to our standard. And so therefore we're just going to say that they need to go to special education and be dumbed down or be indoctrinated. Oh, that was the other thing that I wanted to cover too, was you talked about why would you want to send kids to where they're being indoctrinated? And I think that makes sense for you and I. The issue is that the overwhelming population of teachers are left leaning by far. They did a study, I think it's like 80-something% of teachers are liberal. And so liberals, why would they care? Because their kids are being taught the narrative that they're already being taught at home. They don't care. And they want other kids to be taught that because they think that's what's best. The issue is if you flip the script and let's say they were being taught, Trumpism in school, right? You know how fast liberals would pull their kids out of school or be riding in the streets saying that they're indoctrinating their kids? It'd be tomorrow. And
Yeah,
that's the thing.
absolutely.
People, I want you to have your opinion. I want you to, this until I don't agree with it. That's not how this thing works, man. And you see that on the left and the right. It happens on both sides. So
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump into. I know you said you don't have a lot to talk about on privatized prisons, and I have a little bit. So I want to start by saying that the quote unquote private prisons that we have now, that people use as an example for their basis argument against privatization of prisons is where was I going with this? Excuse me. The prisons that we have now are not actually private. First of all, they do receive funding from the state. And perhaps what's more important is that the state is the one that's responsible for putting people in prison. They have this monopoly over law. So it's not the prison itself that decides who's going to come in. And so I think, whether you're an anarchist or a minarchist type of libertarian, we would both agree that in our ideal society, we wouldn't be putting people in jail for victimless crimes.
absolutely.
These quote unquote crimes that don't have a victim, drug use, and I know you mentioned prostitution in one of your recent shows, and that's one that's kind of hard for you, which I would love to talk about here in a moment. But just owning particular types of firearms, or even going above the speed limit and things. Obviously, you don't usually go to jail for that, but if you failed to pay your speeding ticket, you absolutely would go to jail. And so there's these different laws that we have. We have the world's largest prison population, and anybody
the land of the free were mass incarcerated. Excuse me.
Exactly.
We cannot be claimed to be the land of the free when we lead the world in mass incarcerations.
Yeah, exactly. And so bringing up the meme that you talked about with the iceberg, and it talked about decriminalizing drugs and all these things. If you look at that meme, and you can see obviously that libertarians want to decriminalize these victimless crimes so that there would be a shit ton less of people in jail in a libertarian society, whether that's a minarchist or an anarchist society, it doesn't matter. Nobody would be getting locked up for having an ounce of pot. And so, I just wanted to bring that up. And then as far as, private prisons in the absence of a state, I don't think there would be a very large demand to put people in prisons, other than the fact, if you have a person that is clearly a threat to society, somebody that is, raping or murdering people. Other than that, I mean, there's really no reason to lock somebody up unless they pose an imminent threat, have been shown to pose an imminent threat. I wouldn't see the demand for that. So I wouldn't see that people would necessarily want to pay for that service.
Right. I think I agree with you 100%. I haven't done enough of a deep dive. So I will say this, that no one should be in prison unless they have violated the non-aggression principle, unless they have directly harmed somebody or directly harmed or destroyed someone's property, or obviously their family. I mean, I'll count that into the personal, right? That's it. When it comes to, drug possession, you brought up my opinion on prostitution, or even speeding. I actually haven't even thought about that, right? But at the end of the day, like, what does it matter if you were speeding if you didn't hurt anybody? Now, if you did hit somebody, or God forbid you hit a child or whatever, you need to be held accountable for that, because there you violated the non-aggression principle, right? And so that's my opinion on that. Is that you shouldn't be in jail unless you violate that principle. And I think if you say that to people, it sounds radical when you say, no, you shouldn't be going to prison for heroin use. But heroin use, I don't advocate. I don't think anybody should be using heroin. Heroin's not a good thing. But I don't think that we should treat that person like they had just killed our neighbor. We should treat that person that is obviously in distress and needs help from the community and is using that drug because they probably have some troubles in their lives. And if they don't, and they just want to use the drug because they feel good, well, that's their prerogative to do that, right? So I agree with everything you said. I just want to bring up the fact that I think that's it. You break the non-aggression principle, that's when we should talk about jail time. Anything outside of that, I think is, that goes into individual liberty. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did quickly want to touch on, I don't think we're gonna have enough time to get to those last 3 points, but maybe that's something that we can discuss, on another podcast or what have you. But
Yeah, I'd love to come back on, man, for sure.
absolutely, yes. I definitely would love to have you back on in the
Thank you.
future. We are coming up on an hour here in just a moment, which is my hard limit from Anchor.fm that hosts my podcast.
Yeah.
But I did want to quickly ask you to touch on the human trafficking thing. I know that's something that you're really big into, and I think that's like a very valiant thing to put your money and your mouth and your actions behind. So did you want to what did you want to say about that?
Yeah, I am a huge anti-human trafficking advocate. I've really learned about that fight in 2017, and I learned about a specific organization called Operation Underground Railroad. You can find them at ourrescue.org that specifically fights against child sex trafficking. I believe that children are the most innocent among us and need to be protected. And so I actually volunteer for them. I donate to them monthly. And I actually was just asked to be an official presenter for the organization as well, presenting for businesses and schools and stuff like that, talking about that. What most people don't realize is that if you take McDonald's, you take Subway and Starbucks, three of the biggest chains in the world, and combine their revenue, human trafficking makes more money than that every single year than those three chains combined. It is the grossest violation, in my opinion, of the non-aggression principle. And it needs to be that my podcast and my show, Liberty Uninterrupted, that is one of our key facets, is ending human trafficking. And I think all libertarians should be involved in that fight, because it is the worst of the worst of violations, taking somebody's life, liberty, and their pursuit of happiness away for someone else's sick and disgusting desires is utterly unthinkable, especially when it comes to our children.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, hey, Jamie, I appreciate you coming on today, man. It's been definitely a pleasure having you on the show, and I definitely hope that you will join me again at some point in the future.
1,000%, dude. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I encourage everybody to listen to your podcast. I think you are very well thought out. You are not one of those anarchists that's there to be cool. I think you have really, really well-formed opinions, and I appreciate that. I'll have to get you on Liberty Uninterrupted as well. So.
Yeah, 100%, man. You let me know. I'm down. I'm down for it. So quickly, plug your website and your Instagram again one more time.
Yeah. So you can find my Instagram at Liberty Uninterrupted, and then you can also find the website at libertyuninterrupted.com. That will be launching soon as a blog accompanying the podcast, and then you can find our podcast wherever podcasts can be found. It's in the link on the Instagram. You can go to, I actually use Anchor as well to host. So you can go to anchor.fm/Liberty Uninterrupted to see where we host where I host my podcast, and check that out. Give us a 5-star review and subscribe. I appreciate it.
Excellent. All right. Well, have a good night, man.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Break the State podcast. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so by going to anchor.fm/Break the State. That's ANCHOR.FM/Break the State, and clicking on the support button. Be sure to give me a follow over on Instagram at Break the State for updates on the show and a healthy dose of Liberty memes and other content. You can also find me on YouTube, where every episode gets uploaded the Friday after its original release date. I want to give a big thanks to my guest today, Jamie Kane. Be sure to check out Jamie's podcast, Liberty Uninterrupted, everywhere that podcasts are streaming, and give him a follow on Instagram at Liberty Uninterrupted. That's it for me today, y'all. Until next time, remember, the United States federal government is the world's worst polluter. Peace.